And we're taking you now to Brussels as the European Union summit kicks off this evening, with Theresa May arriving for her first Brussels summit as Prime Minister, pledging the UK will continue to work closely with the EU even once Article 50 is triggered. The Prime Minister is expected to call for a smooth Brexit, but not all leaders have warmly welcomed the British leader. Joining us now to discuss the EU summit ahead of Brexit is our London correspondent, Jonathan Sacerdoti. Good evening to you, Jonathan.
Good evening. So
this is a sensitive time for Britain in the EU. How do you imagine dynamics this evening?
Well, it's a complicated summit for Mrs May. It's her first as the British Prime Minister. And of course, what everyone wants to talk about is Brexit. But they've all made it clear they're not going to negotiate until she triggers Article 50. And she's made it clear that she's not going to do that until March next year. So while this is the topic on all of their minds, it's not really what they'll be talking about at the summit. That will be focusing more on Syria and Russia, and also trade deals like the one with Canada, which Europe has been negotiating for 7 years and is still being stalled by some intricate detail of the politics of Luxembourg, something which some in the UK will say is a sign that the EU is a cumbersome beast and that's why they want to leave. But others will say this bodes badly for the UK, which will need to make its own deal with the EU once it's left. That said, she will have an opportunity to speak about Brexit and update during the dinner this evening, and there won't be very much that she's giving away there either. And while she doesn't give away much and doesn't trigger Article 50, there won't be any negotiations from the others, even if they are giving her harsh words now about how they will react when she does.
Right, there were some hostile remarks from different leaders. Do you believe May received this kind of unwelcome warming this evening?
Well, it's a game that we're seeing played since the result of the referendum. Mrs May is keen to point out that Brexit means Brexit, and during the Conservative Party conference hinted that she'll be going for what people are now calling a hard Brexit, which is almost as opaque a term as Brexit itself. And those on the other side, the other EU member states, are saying things like what we heard President Hollande of France say today, which is if Britain goes for hard Brexit, then they will go for hard negotiations. We even heard the Prime Minister of Malta saying that he thought there was still a chance that Brexit wouldn't happen at all, but he did concede that that had to come from the British people, not from Brussels. So there are all these harsh words for Mrs May. She will be hearing them, but she's going to be determined herself to be just as harsh back in negotiations and hope that both sides can be reasonable when those negotiations do eventually start.
And we'll be hearing her address later on. But what happens inside the UK before Article 50 can be triggered?
Well, within the UK, of course, the government needs to prepare its position so that when it is time to trigger those negotiations with a limit of 2 years before Britain has to leave the EU, they can know exactly what it is they're bargaining for. Mrs May says the reason that she isn't saying very much about Britain's position is because she doesn't want to ruin that negotiating position. And that's why she's going to keep her cards close to her chest, so to speak. She's not giving much away to the country itself, and she's certainly not giving much away to other countries within the EU. But in the meantime, you can believe that she's ferociously planning and negotiating within the Parliament and within the civil service just what positions Britain is going to try to take.
Jonathan Sacerdoti from London, our correspondent, of course. Thank you very much for this.